Hi, my name's Sam, and just want to wish you a really happy Father's Day 2021. Apologies if you just had a little glitch in the stream. We've had a few connection problems, but hopefully it will be stable and you'll be able to get all of what I'm going to share this morning. Otherwise, we will have the edited version out as soon as possible following this. But just want to wish you a really big welcome and happy Father's Day. I hope that you've had a great morning so far. And it would be so wonderful if you could just take a moment just to share in the chat or in the comments if you're watching afterwards, maybe the name of your father or a significant father figure in your life. You know, names are so important. They evoke all kinds of memories, some good, some not so good, but every person has a name, and it's so much more than just dad or father or grandfather. So go on, just share those names. I think that would be really wonderful just to see some of those important names to you. Now, if you've been wondering, what is God really like? I wonder if you've been thinking, well, is God like my father? And maybe that is a good thought for you, or maybe it's not such a good thought for you. Maybe there's some pain and difficulties in there. But today, we're going to discover that whatever your father was or is like, that God is God. And the best way to learn about what God is really like is to look at what Jesus said about his own father, if we're going to answer that question. And just so I don't waste your time, if your family has no problems, no troubles, no awkwardness or difficulties, then I just want to save you some time. Please tune out now and go and find something else to watch. But if you do relate to any of those challenges, then stick around, because I think there's a real message of hope for you today. A little bit about my family. My father is called Simon, and his father is called Peter. And I didn't really know my dad's dad all that well. He very sadly passed away when I was 5 years old. And I'm sure that was a real burden and a tough time for my dad. And my childhood certainly had its bumps along the way. My parents separated when I was 5, and I moved from where we were living just near Manchester down to Gloucestershire, and then we relocated again to Suffolk. So we did a kind of triangle around the country. So lots of moves, new schools, and travelling around for weekends and things like that. So, we all have different backgrounds and stories, and I think it's really fair to say, I'm sure we'd all agree, that the past 18 months has been really tough for families. And I don't just mean tough for families, where you're living together, but tough trying to see extended family. Maybe restrictions about how you can travel and where you can go, depending on where your extended family is, whether you're able to see them, whether it was safe to do so. And that's put a lot of distance in perhaps families that already had some degree of distance in them. But I just hope that today that you're able to make the most of what you can do. Now, whether that's meeting up in person, or whether that's just being able to make a phone call or video call or send a card or a message, that you do make the most of what you are able to do. Now, being a father can be terrifying, certainly at times. And I don't just mean when you're present at the birth, although that is a pretty terrifying thing if you've ever experienced that. And I remember the moment when I first became a dad. It was the 29th of September, 2010, and I'll never forget the time. It was 4:44 a.m. Had been up most of the night, and we're in a small birthing centre in Melton Mowbray. Now, if you know anything about Melton Mowbray, you know it is the home of the pork pie. And one of my Father's Day presents today was a special Dad Melton Mowbray pork pie. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to manage to eat all of that in one go. I'll have to find some helpers with that one. But all of a sudden it happened. And again, when I say all of a sudden, it wasn't quite that sudden. I wasn't the one doing all of the hard work. But suddenly I had this small bundle in my arms, looking at me, probably screaming at that point, which wouldn't be a totally surprising thing when it looked at me. But, suddenly I had this baby and I realized that life was never going to be the same again. And that small creature has over time grown up and become someone I'm become so proud of. And Jenny and I were really blessed to go on to have another 2 small bundles who arrived. And again, just growing up into such wonderful people that I'm so proud of and love very much. Now, some days you can feel like you can do this, whatever doing it actually looks like. Some days you realize just messed up, need to backtrack and repair some things. But one of the things that I've realized as I've gotten older and maybe a bit wiser, certainly having 3 children accelerates that process, is that when you're a child, you observe your parents from a distance. You don't really know what they're carrying. When you're young, you might have flashes or insights into things that are going on, but you just don't know what is exactly going on in their life at the time, what challenges they are facing. And you judge them on your view without fully knowing the whole story. Being a father is always imperfect. There is no way to get everything right. We make mistakes, often not meaning to, but sometimes we hurt others out of our own brokenness because we carry pain from our own childhoods. We are broken just like everybody else. So I suppose what I'm saying is try not to be too harsh on your fathers. There's a lot they have to carry. But the good news is that God wants us to help us to be the best fathers and mothers, for that matter, that we can be. Not modeling ourselves on anyone else that we're looking at. We might see other people think, man, they do such a great job. Maybe I should act or behave like them. No, be the best parent that God has made you to be. And when we look at stories in the Bible and the stories that Jesus shared, it gives us a great insight into that fathering nature of God. And that's where I want to look today and really encourage you. That's where we find our best role model and guide for how to parent, how to father, is by looking at what Jesus said about his Father in heaven. Now, whether you're watching this and you're a father or not, one thing we can all agree on is we're all children, or we certainly were at one point. And I really strongly believe that children need to be fathered. And I'm not trying to be controversial or open up some sort of debate, but I just strongly believe that. Now, many of us, maybe we don't have earthly fathers. Maybe we never knew them, or they've passed away. Or maybe they were there, but also weren't, if you know what I mean. They're absent. Maybe not physically, but maybe emotionally absent. Well, we all do need fathering. I strongly feel that. And I strongly also feel that the completeness of that fathering heart is found in God himself. And just to be clear, just to help us stay on track, God is not male and he's not female. He is God the Creator, the complete fulfillment of everything good. And he expresses himself, his love to us, both in a fathering nature and in a mothering nature. And today we're going to explore more of his nature through one story that Jesus shared in the Bible. And God calls us into that role too, to be mothers and fathers to those around us. Not just our own immediate children and family. Who do you know who you could share and show his love to? Maybe it's a friend's family who are struggling. Maybe someone you work with or a neighbour, or somebody you just see who's in need and you think, I could help. You see, God doesn't stand back as he watches people in pain. The way he acts is through us. He stirs our hearts to show the love that he's shown to us to others. So think about that on this Father's Day. Who do you think might not be getting a card in the post or a phone call, or who might be remembering with pain at the loss of their father that you could get alongside and love? Now, if you've been following along with the recent series, then you'll know that Joel has shared the first two parts of this series where we've been looking at the question, what is God really like? And if you haven't caught those yet, there is still time to catch up. Just wait till I finish this morning, and then you can go and find parts 1 and 2 on our YouTube channel. I really encourage you to go and watch those. And we've been looking at a small story from the book of Luke, and widely known, perhaps famously known, as the story of the prodigal son or the story of the lost son. And it's a story that a doctor called Luke captured in his records of the stories that Jesus shared. Now, in the story, there's 3 main characters really. There's the father, son number 1, and son number 2. And Joel helped us with some of the context of this story in part 1 of this series. And when we read the stories from the Bible, it's always important to consider the situation at the time. And we need to do this before we try and interpret that story for ourselves. Who was it who Jesus was talking to? And what was the cultural relevance of the story at that time? Well, we can find some of these answers quite easily by reading around the text. It's always a good idea to read it in context. And we find that Jesus is speaking to 2 groups of people are present. There's the tax collectors and the Pharisees. Now, the tax collectors were a pretty unpopular group of people. They would take taxes from the Jews and often sort of add on a little bit extra for their own pocket, for all that hard work that they had to do. And then they would hand those taxes over to the Romans, who were definitely despised. They were seen as invaders in the land and imposing their empire. Nobody wanted to give anything to the Romans. So the tax collectors were really bottom of the pile. Now, the other group was the Pharisees, and they were very religious people. And they believed that the way to salvation, the way to please God, was through their own self-righteousness. That they would observe all of their many, many religious practices, to which they added lots more all the time, for how they could feel and present themselves to have act in a more perfect way. But I would also say it wasn't just about that kind of obsession with righteousness. It was also, I would say, a fear of not making any mistakes. They didn't want to be caught out or seen to be doing anything wrong. Well, just summarizing the story, and you can go and read it in detail in Luke chapter 15. And if you do not have a Bible, then we would love to get you one. We have some hard copy Bibles that we'd love to give to you. So if you're really just hungry to learn more, then please put a comment in the chat or leave something in the comments, or contact us through our website, and we would love to get you a Bible to look into these stories and many more, and to help you on that journey. So the story, to summarize. The younger son, perhaps a bit more hot-headed, he really wanted his share of the family inheritance, which is a perfectly reasonable thing. All the sons would be due their share. But the difference here is he wanted it now. He didn't want to wait until his father passed away. He wanted it now so that he could do what he wanted with it without anyone telling him what to do. And he just didn't want to hang around. His father could go on living for many years yet. He wanted it now to go and live some kind of life that he dreamed of. So, surprisingly, the father then split up his property and gave the younger son his share ahead of schedule. Now, you might know this story. The younger son, who is now flush with cash, leaves home and just lives a wild life. He just wants to taste and experience everything that there is out there. He's thrown off all those restraints. He doesn't have to work for his father any longer. Now, the story just says he lives a life of wild living. But I think we can all imagine the sorts of things that he might have been getting up to. Unfortunately, the money, it did run out. Money does tend to do that. It ran out. And then he finds himself alone. Maybe these new friends he's made along the way, kind of the shine's gone off him. He's not as popular as he was. They've obviously all disappeared and found other big spenders to latch onto. And life got very rough and really broke him. And when we read in the story, he ended up very low. And he obviously decided his only option left was to try and go home to his father's estate. Not to be restored as a son, but just to try and work as a servant some way to have some kind of living. And he knew that a great deal of shame would have awaited him back in his community. Not just from his family, but the whole town where he lived would have known what he would have done. He left behind disgrace, and he would return really no better. In fact, probably worse. He was so broken. He saw how he had messed up, but perhaps there was just some glimmer of hope that he might be able to return, at least to be better than where he was right now. So that's a younger son. Then we've got the older son, who's of course much wiser, more stable, and he stayed on with his father. He kept working at whatever they were doing. Maybe it was tending the land, maybe it was running the family business, and he was being the good son, doing what was expected of him, biding his time, not asking for more than he should. And no doubt he had to take on additional responsibilities for what the younger brother should have been doing. And then as the younger son makes his way back, one of the climaxes of the story is the father who's been eagerly waiting and watching, perhaps with a vain hope that his lost son might return home. He spots him from far off. And we can just picture this scene. He runs out to meet him. The younger son has tried to put together this kind of, proposal to say, well, I don't want to be a son anymore. I know that's gone, but just let me work for you. The father disregards that completely because he wants to embrace him. His lost son has returned. He kisses him, he clothes him with a robe, and he reinstates him as a son with a ring on his finger. And then he throws a huge party to celebrate. Well, it doesn't take too much imagination to wonder how the older brother might have felt. And in fact, the story tells us he's out somewhere working in the fields, and he hears all this noise and razzmatazz, so he asks one of the servants what's going on. And, well, when he hears that there's a huge party for his younger brother who's come back, he's certainly into way more than sulk territory. He is angry and bitter. He refuses to join in the party, and no doubt he just felt so cheated and overlooked, as if some kind of great injustice had been served upon his life. He'd lived, maybe like the Pharisees, not making any mistakes, so he thought. But where was his reward? His rule-breaking brother seemed to get everything. His inheritance in advance, a taste of wild living and the good life. And then when it all falls apart, he comes home and he gets reinstated into the family. Well, in parts 1 and 2 of this series, we looked at the two brothers, the rule breaker and the rule keeper. Which one do you think you're perhaps more like? I think if I'm honest, I would say I'm definitely more like the rule keeper. I like to work hard, try and achieve things, try and do the right thing, which in and itself isn't a bad thing. But where do we think that is going? And what about the father? How does this story help us answer that question? What is God really like? Well, the cultural context of the story is quite different to today in 2021. And here's just a few things I would pick out just to get you thinking about what was different. Certainly, sons definitely would never have asked for their inheritance ahead of their father passing away. That was basically saying, Dad, I don't really care about you. I just want my money and I wish you were dead now. That's what it was saying. That would have been so shocking to the listeners at the time. In the story, the younger son, when he gets so low, he's so poor, he has no friends, he has no money, the story records that he's eating with pigs. And the importance of this is that for Jewish people, pigs are seen as completely, totally unclean animals. You should never be associated with pigs, let alone to find yourself eating with them. And again, the listeners would have been shocked by this. It would have underlined and completely stated how low and desperate the younger brother's situation had become. And the last thing I'd point out is that fathers definitely would never have been seen running out to greet their son. This would have been seen as an act of some kind of disgraceful act. Children run, maybe the women would run, but an established father who's head of the household, some kind of upstanding member of the community, would not be seen gathering up his robes, baring his legs, and running out to greet somebody. That would just not have been done. So all of these things, the listeners at the time would have been trying to rack their heads around it. As Jesus shared this story, they'd be thinking there's something different about this father, that he is not what we were expecting. But despite some of these differences between when the story was told and now, I think there's some real timeless truths that we can draw out. And the first one, which I just think we'd all definitely agree with, is families are complicated. And maybe if you're watching now, you could just repeat after me. Families are complicated. And maybe you'd have a wry smile on your face as you say that. You know, every family is full of oddballs. There are perhaps events that didn't quite go as planned, maybe you wish had never happened. There's some strange arrangements here and there, maybe things you learn about as you grow up. There's always things that nobody wants to talk about, those elephants in the room. And perhaps there's some people, sadly, that nobody wants to see. Well, if you're fortunate, hopefully there aren't too many broken relationships in your family, but I'm sure you can agree that families definitely are complicated. And one of the things I think to grasp from this is that this story shows us how much Jesus understands the complexities of family life, that it is not straightforward. Now, what is the role of the father in this story? Well, as I've said, the listeners would have been shocked at his behavior, not what they would have expected. And maybe you will discover that God is not what you expected. First of all, the father should never have divided up his property. When the younger son made this request, the father should have reprimanded him. He should have said, don't you disrespect me in any way. And if it carried on, he should have been thrown out of the family home, maybe even thrown out of the town. That's what a strong father of the day would have done. He wouldn't have accepted that kind of disgrace. He should have laid down the law. So people would start to think, well, what is this weak father? Why does he behave in this way? Why does he give in when the younger son makes this outrageous request? But what about the older brother as well? We often think that he did all the right things. But I think when we scratch the surface a bit more, we see there's some real major flaws in how he acted. You see, I think he should have pursued his brother. When he heard his younger brother make this terrible request for his inheritance, now he should have taken him to one side and said, this is not how we behave. We love our father. You're disrespecting and disgracing him by asking this. You see, as the eldest son, he would have been next in line to take over whatever the family business was, the land, the property, managing the servants and the estate, and whatever position the father had in that community, the older son would have been expected to take that on. And he should have wound his brother in. He should have had that relationship with him to say, this is totally wrong. And then when his brother leaves for this wild land, this far-off land, as it says, where was the older brother there? Surely he should have gone after him to find him, to bring him back. While the father is clearly saddened and carrying pain at his lost son, where is the pain carried by the older brother at losing his younger brother, his sibling? Surely he should have gone off to pursue him, to find him, to rescue him from his own shame and disgrace of eating with the pigs. He should have fed him and clothed him and carried him back to his father's household. You know, it's quite funny because there's a story just like this, only a few verses before, which Jesus shared. You may have heard of it before. It talks about the shepherd and the lost sheep. And the story, very short one, goes like this, that a shepherd has 100 sheep, and as he calls them back in and counts them up, he realizes one is missing. So does he, perhaps like the older brother, if you get what I mean, count his chickens and just hold on, maintain what he's got? No. He goes after the one. He risks losing all the 99 to find that one which is lost because it's so precious to him. Why didn't the older brother have that attitude? So I'm not sure that older brother is doing the right thing all the time. What role do you play in your family? Are you the peacemaker? Or maybe you feel you're on the sidelines for some previous mistakes, or something which got misinterpreted, misunderstood, or never forgiven. Or maybe you've been the victim of other people's broken behaviors. Well, in all of this family mess, in this story, the father does something totally unexpected. The listeners would never have thought that he would behave like this. And when it gets to the story, the bit in the story when he sees the younger son returning, they must have been thinking, right, here comes the rebuke. You know, out comes the belt, off comes the belt, out comes the rod. He's going to be made to suffer for all that he has brought on to that family. But no, he does nothing like that. You see, the tax collectors were quite similar to that younger son. They're keenly aware of their wrong living and brokenness, keenly aware that they needed redemption, but perhaps when they returned weren't likely to get it. I think they were expecting one thing: judgment. Then we look at the Pharisees, the other group of people who are listening to this story, and they were similar to that older son, keenly aware of everybody else's wrongdoing, perhaps keeping score of how much better they were doing than everybody else. But I think also, like that older brother, inside holding some dark secrets, which really they hoped nobody would ever find out, and bring down their whole projection of their perfect personality and perfect living. They were expecting judgment of that younger son. But I think what they were looking for was really vindication of the darkness in their own hearts because of all the other good that they were doing. They thought, I've done so well on all these things, then these little bits of bad blackness that maybe nobody can see anyway, that can be overlooked because of all my excellent efforts. And when you think of God, I wonder whether you either approach him expecting judgment or desiring that vindication, that overlooking, because of all your good efforts. If you expect judgment, maybe you just feel that he'll remind you of how bad you are, and you're already feeling pretty low. Maybe others have told you what a mistake you've been, or how much you've messed up your life and the lives of those around you. Maybe your brokenness has been on display for all to see. Well, if you come to God, you just feel he'll make you feel worse. Just point out all these mistakes, and you'll have to confess what you've done wrong. And that's never really going to help you. So you just feel stuck. Or if you desire that vindication, clearing of your wrongdoing because of your excellent record, by your own efforts, that you'll be seen as better than you really are. All of your external efforts, though, are just a cover-up. That doesn't mean there aren't good things, but you're desperately trying to hide the bad things. You're not trying to earn love anymore. You just want to keep up that pretense. And you look down on others because their sin's so obvious. They're no way as good as hiding it as you are. And that's really how you're living. We kid ourselves that all of the mistakes that we've avoided make everyone think that we're just great. Perhaps some kind of higher level of person. We don't veer off the track. But really, deep down, honestly, we just hope nobody ever finds out what we're truly like inside, what we've been thinking about. Now, the story shows that both of these approaches to God are utterly hopeless, and they lead us nowhere. It's either our own resignation that we aren't good enough, or our own striving to try and maintain a cover-up. Now, I think this story shows us the fathering heart of God. Jesus shares this story to kick both of those views into touch, both of those ways of living, the tax collectors, the Pharisees, those who are present, and point them to the Father in the story, the Father heart of God. So I just want to look at a few things that I think really answer the question of what is God really like. Number one, God is listening. Even if what we're saying or asking is really dumb. You see, the younger son's request, even we can see that and think, that wasn't a good idea. That wasn't wise, was it, to ask for that? Even if it hadn't been disrespectful, it wasn't a good thing to do. You see, we have freedom to make mistakes and bad choices. God isn't going to stop us from doing that. But while we do, he doesn't take his eyes off us. He doesn't forget about us, just like the father in the story clearly was longing and hoping for his younger son to return. God is always listening out for us. You see, when we hurt him, he doesn't recoil. He doesn't reduce his love for us so that he cannot be hurt. No, just in the contrary, the same as the father in the story, he maintains his affection for us, and he carries the agony while we walk away. That's what a true father is like. Number two, God is looking. See, while the younger brother was away, the father is still hoping that one day his son will be found and return and come home. Now we read in the story, it says, while he was still a long way off, while the younger son was still a long way off, the father sees him. Well, how could that be the case? Only if the father was looking for him, was searching for him. Now the younger son wasn't aware that his father was longing and searching for him. He was preparing for a very difficult conversation. And we might not see it. We might not realize that God is looking and searching for us. But he is. And this story shows us that. Number three, God will meet you. Even when the father spots his son from a long way off, he doesn't sort of sit on his bench on his front porch staring down over his spectacles, waiting for the son to make the long, shameful march up, knowing that his heart is probably absolutely rocketing inside of him, in his mouth. No, he runs out to meet him where he is. He was desperate to see him. God wants to meet you right now, where you are. Turn to face him and he'll be there. We don't need to clean up or dress up or even speak up. We just call out in our hearts with sincerity and let him in. Number 4, God will restore you. That would mean for the tax collectors, they wouldn't carry the shame any longer of what they had been doing. And for the Pharisees, that they could accept that they can't get it all right. And they didn't need to hide their mistakes any longer. He runs to the Son. He disregards his offer to work for him as a servant, and he restores him immediately into relationship. This doesn't mean that the past is forgotten or erased, but it is forgiven. And then the healing can begin. What is broken begins to get fixed. And that's the most important relationship between us and our Heavenly Father. Number 5, God celebrates you. The Father is overjoyed when his Son came home. So much so, he doesn't celebrate quietly with a small party. He throws a massive celebration for the household, probably for the whole town. Joel talked about the fattened calf before. You wouldn't just kill that lightly to have some celebration. Everybody would likely have been invited. You see, God is so passionate about each one of us that he celebrates when we turn to him, when we want to engage in relationship with him. Just as this morning when my youngest son, who's asked me every day this week if it's Father's Day, because he made a card for me at school, when he came down this morning with his little bag, eagerly, "Is it Father's Day?" "Yes, it is." And his delight to give me this card that he'd made, how that warmed my heart even many more times over, is God's celebration when we turn to him. Number 6, God is always open. And I'm really talking about the older brother now. The one who was in that fit of rage at the injustice that his younger brother would be restored in this way. Maybe it's similar to the Pharisee who can't understand why the tax collector gets forgiven just the same as he does. And remembering the Pharisee probably doesn't even think he needs forgiveness. Maybe we shut ourselves away from joy in protest when that bitterness has wrapped around our hearts and we can't find a glimmer of smile for anyone else because of what's happened. Maybe we refuse to admit that the smallest of our own mistakes needs forgiveness. God comes to find us, just like in the story. The father leaves the party. He's crazy about his sons, both of them. He wants them all back in relationship. No good having a celebration with only one there. This is what he says, "My son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours, notice he doesn't say this son of mine. He says this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. You see, God isn't just saying that the son is just in relationship with the father. No, he says the son has a place in the family. And that's what God's saying to you today. He doesn't want to just set you in relationship with him. He wants to place you in his family. Then the last point is God goes all in. And in this story, Jesus is telling us that the Father is like his heavenly Father. Timothy Keller writes in his excellent book, The Prodigal God, he says this: Jesus is showing us the God of great expenditure, who is recklessly extravagant towards us, his children. God's reckless grace is our greatest hope, a life-changing experience. See, the Father is reckless. He had to sell some of his land and property to give the younger brother his share. and he slaughtered that fattened calf for his homecoming celebration. But he had to carry the shame and the pain of how his sons had treated him. See, God spent everything he had to reach us. God loves his children so much that he went big. He went all in. And then we know in the life of Jesus, how did God go all in? He went all in by giving his one and only Son as a sacrifice. He gave him over to death to make a way to reach all of us. And that was his big plan, to gamble everything and see if we would respond. I tell you, that is what God is really like. Maybe you've never heard it like that before, and you've carried hurt for so long that it's hard to believe that that could be true. Well, I hope this is starting to change your mind. And as you read this story over and over and understand the depths that that father went to for his sons, you begin to understand the depths that our Heavenly Father will go and has gone to reach you. So if you've been in a distant land, like that younger brother, or like the older brother, if you've been near, but really distant in your heart, the Father's message is this: come home. Whatever has been keeping you away, guilt and shame of your own feelings, or pride and fear of your own exposure, just lay them down. Lay them down. Stop carrying them anymore. Today, God is inviting you to come home. Turn to him. Call on him in your heart. Invite him in. Return to him. We're about to sing a song together. It's called Run to the Father. And I chose this song because I think it speaks to so many of us and where we are. The first line says, I've carried a burden for too long on my own. Do you feel like you're carrying something heavy inside? Is it weighing you down? Well, today is the day to lay it down and to come home. Come home to God. God is a good Father. He is the perfect Father. And he is eagerly waiting for you. He is watching and searching for you. And he wants to celebrate your return. He wants to father you. Open up your heart to him. And tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, run to him. Run to the Father. As the worship team lead us, it's time to really dial in your focus. I just ask you to engage. If you've got distractions around you, just try and put them to one side for a moment and sing along with the words that will be on the screen, and let God hear your cry. Run to the Father.
I've carried a burden for too long on my own. I wasn't created to bear it alone. I hear your invitation to let it all go, and I see it now. I'm laying it down, and I know that I need you. I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, 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 oh. You saw my condition, had left from the start. Your Son for redemption done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I'll run to the Father again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, again and again and again and again. Oh, oh, my heart is in your sights, long before my first breath, running into your arms is running to life from death. I feel this rush deep in my chest. Your mercy is calling out, just as I am. You pull me in, and I know I need you now. I rise to the Father, fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, reasons to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I'll run to the Father again and again. I run to the Father, fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, reasons to wait. My heart found a surgeon, my soul found a friend. So I'll run to the Father again and again and again. Oh, oh, again and again and again. Oh, oh, again and again.
Thank you so much, Sam, for sharing. I really moved and stirred by what you said. I don't know if you've felt the same as me today, just hearing a story. I've heard that story so many times before, and yet still today, there's still so much in there that spoke to me. Just reminded again about no matter where we are, even if we don't realize it, even if we don't feel it, that the Father is looking for us. I love that. I wonder, maybe in the natural, if you've got any broken relationships in your life and you're not sure how those would go. If you rang the person up, would they slam the phone down? If you showed up at the front door, would the door get slammed in your face? Or would they be so happy that you actually rung them? Would they be so happy that you showed up? We don't know what would happen in the natural if we tried to repair a relationship with another person. But what this story does tell us is we do know what the reception would be like from our Father God. We do know that we would be welcomed home. And we'd love to journey with you. We'd love to walk with you. Our hearts are to do everything we can to reach everyone we can. And we are all on a journey. And one thing we'd love to do is send you a free book. We think this book would be really helpful. We think this book would be another encouragement on the next step of your journey of discovering faith and what God, like a father, what it really means. And if you would like to get this book, we'd love to send it to you. All you need to do is please contact us at our email address. It's hello@nlcletchworth.org. If you just drop us an email, and we'll be able to get your details, and then we could post the book to you. We would love to journey together with you. I love what Sam said as well, that in issues of life, that God doesn't stand back at a distance, but he works through us. And we'd love to work together and learn with you more about what God is like. Also, if you are free and you would like to join us, we've got a digital lounge straight after we finish this morning. It's called the Foyer. It's open for about half an hour. You can join on Zoom, and you can just jump on there. Anybody and everybody's welcome. If you are interested in doing that at the end of this meeting, then please feel free. The codes will come up on screen for you. Feel free to jump on that and join us on the Foyer there. Whatever you have got going on today, whether you're got family plans or going to be watching the football later on, whatever you've got going on, I just pray you have a wonderful, great day. And we will be here again next week, same time, starting from Sunday at 10:20 a.m. So really looking forward to seeing you there. So have a great week and see you next week. Bye-bye.